You know what really makes us mad? Is wasting money on CDs with only one or two good songs.
Yeah. Tell them about punk.
What's up, posers? Welcome to Punk Lotto Pod, the game where no one wins. I'm your co-host, Justin Hensley.
I'm your other co-host, Dylan Hensley.
And this is the show where, using a number generator and the Rate Your Music Punk charts, we pick one album and one EP at random to discuss. Please continue to rate, review, and subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. You know, the more reviews you guys do, the easier it is for people to find us. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email us at punklotopod@gmail.com. We also have a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter page, all under the names Punk Lotto Pod, and you can talk to us right there. Yeah, I decided to get the plugs out front, just to, normally we bury them in the back, but let's throw them in the front.
Yep, people just skip to the next episode.
Yeah.
Or turn it off, or...
Right.
I noticed that it does fade out into the next episode a lot on Spotify.
Yeah.
So, in case you were missing that information.
Well, we are back to recording after a brief week-long hiatus. I recently went to the beach, and I didn't feel like editing an episode, so...
And I didn't want to do it either.
Yeah. I suggested that you do it, and then you were like, we can record next week.
Oh, sweet. Week off?
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, as you're hearing this, the Go Betty Go episode just went up last week. So, you know, we were ahead a week, and then taking a vacation put us behind a week. Whatever. It's logistics, but it's back to us this week. We couldn't find anybody who wanted to talk about these records. So, I don't know if that's a good or a bad sign.
It may have just been a convenience issue, though.
Yeah.
Our friend Corey was probably just not available when we were going to record, so unless he specifically told you, no, I don't want to talk about those records.
So we, unless there's anything you want to talk about, we can dive into the show. We're a little bit crunched for time today.
No, let's just dive in.
Cool. So for this week's episode, we got the year 1993, and honestly, I think there's a lot to say about this year. 1993 looks like the year that punk got good again. Is that fair?
Well, yeah, I mean, generally,
yeah,
that's probably true. Though, I don't know. I mean, looking at this first page of results, it's kind of weird. And maybe it gets better the further back you go. But, I mean, I definitely see some great stuff on this first page, but...
Yeah. Number 1 and number 2 are the Rate Your Music standards, Unwound and Fugazi. As we've pointed out many times in the past, anytime those two bands have released an album, they are going to be in the top 10 of the Rate Your Music chart for that year.
It's the punk bands that non-punks listen to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I love Fugazi, but...
Yeah, all right, yeah. Fugazi is universal, but Unwound, we've talked about Unwound before, and it doesn't make any sense why they're as critically acclaimed as they are. They're a good band, not a great band. To me, I don't know. It's their album, Fake Train, and the Fugazi record is actually one of my favorite Fugazi albums, In on the Killtaker. I really love that little middle period of Fugazi, like In on the Killtaker. What's the one after that?
Red Medicine? See, I would put Red Medicine towards...
Oh, the album before, excuse me. Steady Diet of Nothing
favorite.
Came out before this. That's the one I like. I guess it's still kind of early, but Steady Diet and In on the Killtaker are probably my two favorites back to back.
I would go with Repeater and Steady Diet, but I do really like In on the Kill Taker. That one just, I don't know, my memory of it is always a little hazy. I always have to kind of like listen to it to remember what's on it.
Yeah. It doesn't quite have the huge songs, like maybe, yeah, if you look at it, the songs don't jump off the page, but it's one of those where you listen to the songs and you're like, oh, right. These songs are incredible. But yeah, skipping number 3 because I don't know who the hell Dog-Faced Hermans are. Where you get to number 4, and that is Quicksand with their album Slip. That's what, the first Quicksand full length, right?
Yeah, because the EP came out in 1990, the self-titled EP. Maybe unpopular opinion, the only good Quicksand album?
It's definitely the one I usually go to whenever I start to listen to Quicksand, but, and this is an unpopular opinion, I usually don't ever finish the albums. I tend to get bored with Quicksand's albums and turn them off halfway through. I'm more of a Rival Schools, Gorilla Biscuits fan. Not so much Quicksand. It's like new metal before new metal. Skipping down a little more, some weird ones there. Why is that New Bomb Turks album so highly rated?
I don't know. Yeah, we've got, let's see here. That Drop Dead album is probably important, but honestly, I know so little about Drop Dead. I have nothing to say about it.
I listened to a little bit of it in, getting ready for this week's episode, and it's good. I mean, it's like it's crusty stuff. It's definitely an influential record on how crust would play out going throughout the 90s and even in the 2000s, But yeah, it's a solid album. I mean, I'm just not a huge crust fan, so that's why it didn't do too much for me. But number 7 though is Moss Icon's Laburnum Wits in Liberation Fly. I assume I said that right, but
yeah,
incredible. I would say underrated, but that's not true. They are a very positively reviewed band, but maybe they're not the most popular.
Yeah, maybe the average listener hasn't listened to Moss Icon. Yeah, I mean, they're pretty well critically praised across the board.
They're definitely a band that they're probably the first band you will find once you start to scratch below the Rites of Spring and Embrace layer of emo core.
Yeah, I was going to say, once you get past the Revolution Summer, Moss Icon is the first band that you're going to listen to.
Yeah, and you should, because they are that good. Do we want to mention that Reverend Horton Heat album?
I don't know if I've even listened to that one, so we can skip it. I don't think it's a prominent Reverend Horton Heat record.
I listened to a little bit of it. I had listened to it in the past, but it's been a very long time since I listened to it. Like, I don't know if we've said this before, but you only really need one psychobilly band. And Reverend Horton Heat is my one psychobilly band that I like. So,
yeah, that's not something that comes up often.
No.
It's not a heavy rotation.
Skipping ahead a little bit, let's just talk about some of the bigger hits on this list. Number 10 is Bikini Kill's Pussy Whipped. That's a huge record. Is that the biggest Bikini Kill album? Maybe the most well-known? Yeah, it's definitely the most well-known because it has the most ratings out of all of them.
Yeah, I think a lot of the Bikini Kill stuff that would be like the singles, though.
Yeah. Yeah, or even the EPs that came out before, like the Revolution Girl Style Now and Bikini Kill self-titled.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do very much love Reject All American. Like that's my favorite album by them that I've listened to.
Yeah, and
that might be my least favorite Bikini Kill, actually. Pussy Whipped, even though it's the most popular, it has I don't know if it's a rawer production, but they do something to Kathleen Hanna's vocals that, like, they're way more garagey or echoey. Like, I definitely prefer the cleaner sounding recordings of Reject All American and the earlier EPs, but still a good album.
Yeah. Wow. I think we can skip quite a bit on this list.
I did want to mention number 12, that Bad Religion Recipe for Hate album. That's a big album. It's the one with Kerosene, which might be the best Bad Religion song, and American Jesus. So like that's a big album. I actually listened to that entire album this week, and I think I've always had this negative reaction to Bad Religion, and I think it's just because all their albums tend to sound the same. And all their songs tend to sound the same. But, I listened to that one and I didn't hate it. So, I don't know. I enjoyed it. Kerosene is a great
Bad
song.
Religion's not really a bad band. And
No.
they've just, they got very paint by numbers very quickly. So I've never really understood why people get so into them other than just, like, Legacy.
And I always feel like they're kind of an entry-level political punk band. Like, they're definitely... It's not to say that Greg Graffin's not smart. I mean, he's got a doctorate. But, I mean, they're always, like, the first band that a lot of punks are like, oh, right, politics, they're whack. Like, it's them and Anti-Flag. I feel like those are the two bands that any burgeoning punk gets into that's like political minded, that they're like, hey, let's question some authority over here.
Well, speaking of politically minded bands, probably one of the only other must listen, kind of required listening records on this list that I see would be How to Clean Everything by Propagandhi.
Oh yeah, for sure.
There's other interesting stuff on here, like
number 30 is a monster record.
Yeah.
Navio Forge, As We Quietly Burn a Hole Into, which is a Sarah Kirsch band. One of my all-time favorite records. Like, that record is a monster. And yeah, I if you are into, if you like the Moss Icon sound and the Embrace and Rites of Spring sound, give that record a listen if you haven't already, because it is one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah. I do think this list does get more interesting on the second page, which
it does.
Is probably a good segue into our album, because that one is on the page. Because when we picked that one, I was just scrolling through this whole page, and there are some really interesting ones on here. Just the ones that jump out to me. There's a Born Against album. There's a Hum album. There's Leatherface, Minx. From Angry Heads with Skyward Eyes by Still Life is a great record. And then there's, maybe not all great stuff, but big names like Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, Voodoo Glow Skulls, Bratmobile, The Muffs, which I guess Bratmobile's not bad necessarily.
I listened to that album too this week, and I was in the car a lot. That's why I listen to a lot of these albums. That album is very raw. It's like very garage.
That was the impression that I got from it, that it was mostly just not served well by its production.
Yeah. I have heard other songs on different albums that were a little better recorded, and but I like what they're doing. Like, I definitely like the type of music they're playing and the songs they're writing. It's just, the production isn't the greatest. I did want to say that Muffs record is incredible.
Is it? I am not familiar with them, so...
That record... So, going through these charts, I found two albums that I just, like, instantaneously fell in love with. And the one is The Muffs, their self-titled album. They're always a band I'd heard talked about, but I had never really listened to myself. And it's a fantastic pop punk record. Sort of Ramones core, but not fully. And the other record that I found was the Doughboys and their album Crush. And that record is... I can't believe I've been sleeping on that band for as long as I have, because there's a Sam I Am song that name drops them. I can't remember which song it is, but the line is something like "The Doughboys broke up on your front lawn" or something like that. And I don't know why it took me this long to actually listen to the Doughboys, but they are like the musical lineage of Sam I Am. Like, Sam I Am is a continuation of what the Doughboys were doing. And that record is amazing. And our friend Jordan in the band Old Flings, I had posted that I was listening to this album, and he said, my musical, how did he word it? Let me find it real quick. He says, I tell people the progression of our sound goes Doughboys to Sam I Am to Old Flings.
I'll have to listen to that one because, yeah, that's a name I've heard, but a band I've never listened to.
I would definitely listen to that album first. The ones before are a little more raw, and the album that came out a couple years later isn't quite as good. They may be one of those bands where it's like they have one incredible album and like a couple okay ones.
Which that kind of describes a lot of this era of punk. There's a lot of names on here that I know, but I am just not familiar with what they sound like, or at the very least, like my impression of them is colored by bands that they're maybe associated with or what I've heard of their later stuff.
Yeah, but once you get past that second page, it really starts to get real.
And one of the other things I noticed on this list is that hardcore, as you know, hardcore in the 90s is very underrepresented. There's that Looking Glass Self by Snapcase. There's a 108 record, but there's really not much else. Everything else is maybe the Discord sound. Solid Brass by Circus Lupus. That's a great record. So this is kind of it's kind of an interesting year for maybe the harder sounding punk bands.
Yeah. Well, do you want to dive into our album?
Yeah.
All right. So for this week, we got number 45 on the album charts, and it is Seaweed and their album 4. Basics out of the way. Seaweed are from Tacoma, Washington. Yeah, at this point they haven't played in a while, but they're from Tacoma, Washington. They released this album on Sub Pop Records, and the personnel on this record is Aaron Stauffer on vocals, Clint Werner and Wade Neal on guitars, John Atkins on bass, and Bob Bulgreen on drums. The album was produced by the band themselves. And I guess the biggest claim to fame off of this album, they made a music video for the song Kid Candy that was featured on an episode of Beavis and Butthead. And
yeah,
it's one of the worst segments I've ever seen from that show.
That video was, I know that was featured a lot on MTV too, so.
Mm-hmm. All right, well,
Seaweed. Yeah. Seaweed is not a band that I would have ever imagined, if I didn't already know this about them, would be signed to Sub Pop Records.
Yeah. Their signing is kind of what it kind of influences their sound a little bit. So they're from Tacoma, Washington, in the early 90s, on Sub Pop Records, in the middle of the grunge boom. And they are a punk band for the most part. So this record it's like a blending of grunge and punk rock that was going on around this time. So like there are elements of Nirvana and Mudhoney, and even like the vocals sound kind of similar to Perry Farrell from Jane's Addiction. But if you look at like on the punk side of things, there's definitely some Sam I Am and some Jawbreaker and a little bit of Quicksand.
Seaweed for me, I get, and this was somewhat confirmed by an interview that I read. To me, I've always put Seaweed in the same category as Quicksand in terms of like an 80s hardcore going more melodic in the 90s. And they were definitely, like Minor Threat, Embrace, Dag Nasty fans. The grunge thing, I see the temptation to apply that to them. And it makes sense being where they're from and they're being signed to a big label. It's funny that you said Jane's Addiction.
That's what his voice really reminds me of.
Yeah, it almost is like that kind of voice, but a punk delivery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I guess Game Face, the lead singer of that band, kind of has a similar voice to that as well. It's a higher registered voice, but it's kind of smooth, like it's not whiny, and he can sing a little more.
Yeah,
than
it's like a pitched yelling kind of. Yeah. I did also in that interview read that they're directly, or almost, maybe not directly, but indirectly responsible for Sunny Day Real Estate.
Oh, really?
Being the big band that they are, because Sunny Day Real Estate was signed to Sub Pop after Seaweed. So they kind of said themselves, like, without Seaweed being on Sub Pop, there'd be no Sunny Day Real Estate. So it's funny to think of Seaweed as the band that kind of altered the trajectory of punk and emo into the mainstream.
That's interesting. I guess that's kind of true, because if Sub Pop sound at the time was a little artier, I guess, a little like there's the grunge stuff and there's the Sonic Youth stuff. But yeah, I guess Seaweed is kind of like the bridge into like the pop punk, or not pop punk, but like the more emo-y punk rock melodic type stuff. So yeah, that kind of makes sense. I do also see Sunny Day Real Estate being almost a reaction to Green Day, like the explosion of Green Day.
Yeah.
Not in the sense that they sound anything alike, but in the sense that every label was signing up any punk band in hopes to making another Green Day success, which is how you wound up with Jawbreaker and major record labels and, all those, Sam I Am on Atlantic. And
well, yeah, I mean, and Green Day is probably the reason that Seaweed got signed to Sub Pop. So, yeah.
What year was that Green Day, right? What year was Dookie? 94?
Oh, no, I guess it does predate. That's weird.
Yeah. I'm assuming Tacoma is the reason why. The fact that they're a Washington band is the reason why they got signed to Sub Pop. They're regional, and Sub Pop's a Seattle label, so.
Yeah.
But there is like this, it's yeah. So
But right, it's that time period.
Mm-hmm.
It's the post grunge trying to corner a new subculture
Mm-hmm.
and sign it up as quickly as possible. And that just happened over and over again throughout the 90s.
Yeah.
And into the 2000s. I mean, just look at the way emo and post-hardcore and whatever blew up throughout the 2000s.
Yeah. What did you think of the record itself?
I kind of want to say this is my favorite Seaweed record.
Really?
And I had that impression going into it.
It's a lot of people's favorite.
I knew I had listened to it multiple times before. Seaweed was a band that I kind of explored their discography maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of like listened to all of their albums like in a row, not necessarily back to back, but just kind of like for a couple week period there. I was like, oh, I'll listen to the next Seaweed record. And I really loved their sound. And
yeah,
this record in particular to me just really stood out as being everything that I like about Seaweed done really well. It may not have necessarily their best song, but I think beginning to end, it's the record I enjoy the most.
I like Spanaway the most. Like out of their albums, Spanaway is my favorite. It's the mainstream record that came out on Hollywood Records, which is Disney's record label, which is crazy. And that album did not do well, and then they were forced to sit on the bench for a long time before they were able to release a follow-up album and get out of their contract. But Spanaway is my favorite. It's like the pop record for them. 4 is probably the quintessential Seaweed record. Spanaway, I think, is the most enjoyable record, but 4 is the album that's most representative of what Seaweed is, because it's right before they signed to Hollywood Records, and so it's got them doing the pop melodies stuff, but then it's also still got a little bit of their roughness from Despised and Weak, the previous 2 albums. So it's a nice bridge album for them, and it's really, I would give this to someone who was I don't know, it's hard to say. It's always just give me a great record, then I'd give them Spanaway. But if someone was I really want to get into the band, I would give them this record to listen to.
This is definitely the starting point.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you listen to that sequence of records of 4 and Spanaway and their last album, Actions and Indications, the merge record. And then if you're really, really into it, I think maybe you can go back. Yeah.
Because the previous 2 albums are very raw compared to...
yeah, they actually had 2 records on Sub Pop before this one. Yeah.
Yeah. See, I didn't think that I didn't look at the release.
Yeah, but I always assumed 4 was the first Sub Pop record, but no.
No. So, listening to this album, I was thinking that it's a great summer album, but it's not like a party summer album. This is a driving in your car with your windows down because your AC is broken, and you're on your way to your crappy job that you don't like, but it's not really going to be that bad of a day because, you're off the next day and you're kind of excited to eat the leftover pizza you brought for lunch. Like,
this record is a lot like On the Mouth by Superchunk. An early Superchunk in general. It has that fun and melodic feeling, but also pretty heavy.
Yeah, like there's definitely some aggression on this record, primarily in the guitar parts. But yeah, it's funny you mentioned Superchunk because the Seaweed toured with not Jawbreaker, with Superchunk and Quicksand, and I feel like Seaweed is right between those two bands. Like that's perfectly describes their sound.
Yeah, I mean they toured with Green Day and Bad Religion too.
Yeah. It's funny. I'd even say some of the later 90s like radio rock bands kind of jacked Seaweed's sound to a degree. Like Eve 6 is a band that comes to mind. Like they definitely heard some Seaweed records, I think. Like they have some slower songs that Seaweed didn't do, but their faster tracks definitely are in that vein, like the punkier side of grunge.
Well, yeah, kind of that weird, maybe Eve 6 is like the logical progression of that weird sort of grungy punk amalgamation that Seaweed did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I could see that. That's not something I would have thought previously, but
yeah. And
that even kind of spills into like Jimmy Eat World, like Bleed American.
Mm-hmm.
And Futures, like in terms of how like chunky those guitars are.
Yeah. So Seaweed has such a weird little legacy too, though, because I'm trying to think of how punks really would take to Seaweed, and I don't know what punks think of Seaweed.
The only thing I can think of, like Drug Church, are definitely Seaweed fans. Pat is, at least. But yeah, that's like the only association with Seaweed that I have with contemporary punk culture. Like, they're very much a forgotten band, it seems like.
And it's probably because they were never really on a punk label. No Idea put out like a 7-inch in the 2000s. But like the rest of their albums were Sub Pop, Merge, and Hollywood. So yeah, this kind of reminded me of the discussion we had with Paul from Tor Johnson Records, where he was talking about how there were like multiple different forms of punk when he was growing up. That like there was the more like pop punk stuff, like your Warped Tour type stuff, and then your more hardcore stuff. But then there was also the ones that they were almost considered indie bands, like indie rock bands.
Yeah,
and like, this is kinda,
like Superchunk is always talked about as an indie rock band, and you listen to everything before Foolish, and you're like, and even then, most of Foolish,
yeah,
and you're like, oh no, that's a punk record.
Well, even Majesty Shredding, and
the comeback records for Superchunk, again, those are all punk records to my ears.
It's just it's like the middle era of like you said, post Foolish is where I would call those indie rock records.
But I think too, like in terms of like the music scene, Superchunk and Chapel Hill, and it's never been thought of as a punk scene, even though most of those Chapel Hill bands are very much punk rooted bands.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the only Seaweed to me is almost like a band that a punk band that brown pants metal guys listen to, because I even hear a little bit of their sound in like the Antenna era of Cave-In, like the Jupiter, the melodic Cave-In records, the not hardcore ones, up until like the reunited Cave-In sort of blended,
Yeah, I could see that.
And vocally, they are similar to me. Steve Brodsky has a similar kind of higher register, mostly clean, not like really gravelly voice.
Mm-hmm.
can sing fairly well, decently.
Yeah.
And really heavy guitars, but really melodic. I don't know. That's kind of maybe the next couple steps.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I really enjoyed the record. I think it's a really fun record. I have they're a band that I really enjoy, and I definitely think they don't quite get their due when it comes to what they were doing. Well, what would you rate the album?
I'm a 5-star man.
Wow.
I love this record. I listened to it. I listened to it in the car.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely got that exact feeling that you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's a summertime like punk driving record. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. It's a touring. It's in a van driving down, from gig to gig record to me. Like, even though I've never experienced it myself, but that's what I imagine that feeling is. It's got a little bit of melancholy, but it's kind of it's excitement too. So I don't know. It's a fun record. I'd give it a 4.25. To me, the songs individually, there are only a couple that I'm like, oh, hell yeah. Like 1 Inch Punch, Kid Candy, and Wait for the Fade. Like, those are the songs that I'd be like, those are the big songs. But there's a couple tracks on here that they're just sort of there for me. They don't quite tip over into like full on loving it. But the mood overall is what works for me. Like, I like the album as a whole more than I like it as individual tracks. I think Spanaway is the one you could probably pick apart and just hand out songs and people would be fully happy. But 4 works so much better as an album. Yeah, I give it 4.25. Yeah. Well, are you ready to talk about our EP?
Yeah, I was surprised by this one.
All right. Well, our EP is number 17 on the Rate Your Music charts, and it is Babes in Toyland and their EP Painkillers. From Minneapolis, Minnesota. This was released on Reprise Records, which is surprising because that's Frank Sinatra's record label. That's a major label. The person on this record is Kat Bjelland on guitar and vocals, Maureen Herman on bass, and Lori Barbera on drums and vocals. The record was produced by Jack Endino, who produced some Seaweed records, actually. And, of course, Nirvana, Soundgarden, and Mudhoney. So that's a pretty big name producer there. So the record was released... So this is a tricky one. So it is an EP in the sense that there's only an EP's worth of new material. Every listing I saw also has a live set of... They call it Fontanelle Live.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a lot of songs from their previous full-length album, Fontanelle, which was like a huge, like, not a huge hit, but like a financial hit. Like it did very well. And so it was kind of capitalizing on the popularity of that record, and then also throwing in some new songs.
Yeah. as well as a re-recording of an older song.
Oh, okay.
The first track is a re-recording of a song from their first album. I think that's what I read. Let me verify that really quick. Yeah, He's My Thing was originally released on their first album, Spanking Machine.
Oh, okay.
So they re-recorded that for this EP. And then there's like, I think 2 of the songs were maybe leftover tracks from Fontanelle and 2 were new songs.
Okay.
It's generally, that's the information that seems to be out there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what is your thoughts on this record?
I did not expect this record to sound at all the way it does.
No.
I had pretty low hopes for it.
Mm-hmm.
Babes in Toyland is not a band that I have heard a lot of great things about. They're not, it seems like maybe they were the most mainstream of the, and I don't even know if you can really properly classify them as a Riot Grrrl band.
So I read about that as well. The band themselves did not associate themselves with the Riot Grrrl scene.
Yeah, and I never really got that impression. I've heard their name mentioned as a Riot Grrrl band, but that seems like a misclassification. I mean, and even Rate Your Music uses that tag.
Yeah.
And
Kathleen Hanna actually said that they took a lot of inspiration from Babes in Toyland. So they inspired Riot Grrrl bands.
Well, yeah, that's the thing is they were, they predated it. Spanking Machine came out in 1990. They formed it in like 1987.
Yeah.
And they didn't come out of that scene, and they definitely don't sound like, not that all of those bands even really sound that much alike, but
right.
They don't really sound like Bikini Kill, and they don't sound like Slater Kinney, and I feel like those are maybe the 2 you can most pinpoint as the sound of Riot Grrrl.
Right. They sound much more akin to Lunatics. Like they've got the early Lunatics albums. Because the later ones they actually kind of turned into a punk band. But like the early, like we just did Lunatics not that long ago, and there are a lot of similarities to the Sugar Love EP, to this Painkillers EP. It's primarily in the guitar work.
So, okay, when I started listening to it, I really did not like the first song. I mean, right off the bat, I was just like, ugh, this is just, like that Lunatics, like a bad Where the Misfits would have gone, maybe. They had kept going. And what the Misfits became when they did reunite. But after that first song, which makes, that makes sense because that first song was just an older song re-recorded, the sound shifted a lot. I mean, Laredo is maybe similar, but then Istigkeit, or whatever that song was.
Istigkeit. Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce that either.
To me, that sounded like the Melvins.
That's what I was thinking of.
Or like I really, really got a big similar feeling to like Made Out of Babies.
Okay.
Yeah. That kind of noise rock and weird, and the really breathy stuff, and then the really frantic stuff.
Herky jerky.
Yeah. And then Ragweed and Angel Hair. I enjoyed both of those songs. Like everything, like the 3rd track through the 5th track, I really liked it.
Stretch by hooks go.
So we have the exact opposite take on this EP. So when the album starts, I really like He's My Thing. I thought that was a really fun song. It's the most high energy, and it's definitely the most poppy song of the 5, I believe. And then Laredo is right after that, and I like that one as well. It's got a little bit of a Western sort of, I mean, it's definitely, the song is Laredo, and so they're definitely influenced by country Western music on that one, particularly in the way that it's more the strum pattern of the guitars, not so much the actual, like, tones of anything. But once you get to Istigkeit and Ragweed, I hate those songs. I really hate those songs. Ragweed really gets on my nerves because it's this spoken word sort of thing.
See, and okay, that also really reminded me of the Melvins a little bit, but also Sonic Youth. And I was not expecting to hear the Sonic Youth in this record at all.
Well, you hear the Sonic Youth thing because they played with Sonic Youth on tour, and I'm pretty sure that what's his name, Thurston Moore, was also at one of their early shows and helped get them a record deal.
Oh.
So it's weird that Thurston Moore was at the Babes in Toyland show and the Lunatics show, and he managed to get both of those bands signed, and then they both have a Riot Grrrl connection while not really being Riot Grrrl bands. So that's really weird. It's a funny there are a lot of similarities between these two bands, and the difference becomes, I guess, what they do later. Their earlier material is more in common with each other than what they branch off in opposite directions.
Yeah. I don't know how much of the live, I only listened to maybe like the first song from the live set, but I did skim some of their other stuff. And that live recording, they kind of sound like almost like the Jesus Lizard.
Yeah, there's a really big noise rock vibe to a lot of those songs. And to a lesser degree, Shellac. But yeah, Jesus Lizard and Melvins are probably like the big comparisons that you would make. Like, I would compare them to them before I would even compare them to Riot Grrrl bands.
Yeah, but when you look at maybe their similar artists on Spotify, you get an entirely different impression.
Oh, right. So
because you get Bikini Kill, L7, Hole.
Yeah, the Hole connection is, I believe, due to a story about Courtney Love being in Babes in Toyland briefly. According to two of the members of the band, they were like, no, she was never in the band. Like, she came to practice a couple times and like picked up an instrument and tried to play along. And then one of the other members of the band is like, no, they replaced me with her, and for like a couple weeks, and it just didn't work out, and then she came back. So I don't know what the actual story is there. They probably were like, no, we never had Courtney Love in our band.
Yeah.
Purely just to be like, we don't want anything to do with her. But I think the comparisons to L7 and 7 Year Bitch are actually probably more accurate, because that is a brand of,
well, it's definitely, I would say that those make sense in comparison to their first album.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the later they go, the artier they get, the noisier they get, and yeah, Melvins make way more sense. Yeah, it's interesting.
But yeah, I mean, if you look at their similar artist lists, it's like every lazy music journalist comparison to bands made up almost entirely of women, or at least fronted by women, because like they don't sound like the Gits.
No,
they don't sound like Bratmobile.
No, not at all. They're probably the most different from them. They don't sound like Bikini Kill.
Yeah, they don't sound like Bikini Kill, Sleater-Kinney. They don't have any of that like almost surfy guitar playing, or it's like heavy shit-kicking riffs, for the most part.
Yeah.
Or then like, at least on this EP, and it seemed like a little bit on Fontanelle, like feedbacky, more sonic experimentation.
Well, you know what? They're from the Midwest. I didn't think about that, but that actually makes their sound make a lot more sense. Because the Midwest was dominated by like noisier, artier, like yeah.
Well, I mean, just go if you were to just go off of Minneapolis. I mean, you've got Husker Du and Dillinger 4. Both melodic bands, punk bands that have a lot of dissonance and feedback.
Yeah, and then Minnesota's not even that far from. I'm wondering if that goes way back to the Stooges almost, because Minnesota is not terribly far geographically from Michigan and Detroit. So,
well, yeah, I mean, you can very easily connect everything from like throughout the Rust Belt and the Midwest, and in terms of punk. Yeah, the Stooges definitely make sense, and the Stooges spiritually make sense in this band in terms of the scuzziness.
yeah. I definitely I even noted that one of the songs sounded like "He's My Thing" had a little bit of a Stooges style to it. Maybe more like her vocal delivery, like the way she was like holding extended notes vocally that reminded me very much of Iggy Pop. Well, unless you have anything else you want to say about this record, we want to rate it?
Yeah.
I'll go first on this one. I'm going to give it a 2.5. I didn't love it. I liked the first song a lot. I liked the second song okay. And I really despised like the other 3 songs after. I was not a fan of those songs at all.
Well, I would give it a 3.5. I also didn't love it, but it surpassed my expectations in a lot of ways. And it got me more interested in them as a band. I would like to go listen to Fontanelle, Well,
from what you said, you'll probably enjoy it more than I will, because I tried to listen to a little bit of it, and it just didn't do it for me. But since you like the songs I didn't like, you may wind up liking that album. So, see, the Hensley Brain isn't identical.
This is a great example of our differing tastes.
Yeah.
I do like some experimentation, and I have more tolerance for experimentation than you do.
That's true. I like a little experimentation. But yeah, very cool. Well, I guess I haven't even told you what we're talking about next week. So
what are we talking about next week?
So next week we are going back to 1977. We're eventually going to need to stop talking about 70s records because there's only so much we can say. But so next week we're doing the year 1977. We got number 24 on the album charts, and it is The Boys and their album The Boys. And for our EP we got number 28, and it is Squeeze, Packet of 3. So a 77 punk also rans? I don't know. We'll have to get into it and see what the deal with these bands is. So that's a very third string list. Apologies to those bands in advance. We don't know for sure. We may wind up loving those records. Squeeze, I know, have actually kind of a legacy. So I'd be curious to see what they're doing in 77. Well, all right. Like I said at the top, we're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, punklautopod. Our email address is punklautopod@gmail.com. And we have a website. It's punklautopod.simplecast.fm. I guess that'll do it for this week. I don't know. God, we need an outro.
Is there a good Babes in Toyland joke from The Simpsons?
I don't know. Maybe there's like a clip from the Christmas movie, Babes in Toyland.
Maybe, yeah.
Laurel and Hardy. Did we win?
Yeah, I think so.
I think we broke even. It's always so hard because the EPs are so much shorter than the album, so you almost have to weight the album compared to the EP score. But yeah, I don't know.
It's purely a gut reaction.
Yeah.
There's no rubric.
Well, bye.
All right, stop recording.
What happened to the sound?